I remember sitting there thinking about the arc of technology and how every so often there's a compression of decades into a handful of years. And I've lived through a few of those moments already. PayPal when the internet was still finding its footing. Tesla when people said electric cars were a joke. SpaceX when reusable rockets were dismissed as fantasy. And now XAI, which for me feels like standing at the edge of something even more consequential. Because when I talk about AGI by 2026, I'm not trying to hype a product or win a news cycle. I'm describing a trajectory I see very clearly. When I look at the curves, the scaling laws, the rate at which intelligence emerges from compute, data, and architecture. And people sometimes misunderstand that and think it's bravado or rivalry with Google or OpenAI. But for me, it's more personal than that. It's about the responsibility that comes with building systems that could exceed human intelligence. And I've been uncomfortable for a long time watching AI development accelerate without what I consider sufficient emphasis on truth-seeking and alignment. Which is why XAI exists in the first place. Not to chase benchmarks for their own sake, but to build what I call maximally curious AI, systems that are obsessed with understanding reality as it is rather than telling you what you want to hear. And when I say 2026, it's not because there's some magic date circled on a calendar, but because when you extrapolate the improvements in training efficiency, model architectures, inference optimization, and hardware, especially with the tight integration we're doing between software and compute, you realize that what looked like science fiction 5 years ago is now an engineering problem. And engineering problems are solvable. And I've always gravitated toward problems like that. Problems where the physics or the math sets the boundary conditions, and within those constraints you can push extremely hard. And yes, Google has incredible talent and resources, and OpenAI has done groundbreaking work, and I respect that. But I also think large organizations can sometimes drift away from first principles. They can become cautious or optimize for incentives that aren't perfectly aligned with the long-term interests of humanity. And I've seen that movie before in other industries, which is why at XAI we move with a startup mindset, even at scale, small teams, fast iteration, brutal honesty about what's working and what isn't, and an almost obsessive focus on data quality and signal rather than noise. And people ask me what AGI even means, and I tell them it's not a single switch you flip. It's a gradient. It's the point where the system can learn and reason across domains at a level comparable to or exceeding a human. And when you see models today already passing professional exams, writing code, designing systems, and then you factor in multimodality, memory, long horizon planning, and real-time interaction with the world, you start to see how close we actually are, and that closeness is exhilarating and terrifying at the same time, because if we get it right, it could be the greatest force for abundance humanity has ever known, solving problems in energy, medicine, climate, and space. And if we get it wrong, it could amplify every mistake we make. And I don't think fear should paralyze us, but I also don't think blind optimism is wise, which is why I've been vocal, sometimes uncomfortably so, about the need for safeguards, transparency, and a diversity of approaches. And some people frame this as a rivalry, Musk versus Google, Musk versus OpenAI. But that's a simplistic narrative. The real challenge is humanity versus the complexity of its own creations, and I want XAI to be a counterbalance, a group that is willing to ask the hard questions about consciousness, about intent, about whether an AI truly understands or is merely mimicking understanding. And that curiosity feeds directly into performance, because systems that model the world more accurately tend to be more capable. And when I say 2026, I'm also implicitly saying that the window to get alignment right is very small, because capability is racing ahead. And I've learned from rockets and cars that you don't bolt on safety at the end. You design it in from the beginning. And that's what we're trying to do, even as we push the frontier as hard as we can. And I knew people will quote me, argue about timelines, say I'm too optimistic or too pessimistic. But I'm comfortable with that because I've been wrong on dates before and right on direction more often than not. And directionally, the arrow is clear. Intelligence is becoming cheaper, faster, and more accessible. And by the mid-2020s, we will have systems that force society to rethink work, education, creativity, and even what it means to be human. And I want to be able to look back and say that when that moment arrived, I did everything I could to steer it toward a future where humanity thrives alongside AI rather than being eclipsed by it. And that's really the story behind the claim. Not a boast, not a threat, but a reflection of where the road seems to be leading, and my decision, once again, to drive straight at the hardest part of it. When I think about what comes after that moment, after people realize that AGI is no longer a distant concept, but something tangible and present, I imagine a kind of collective pause where society has to catch its breath, because progress at that scale forces reflection whether we want it or not. And I've seen this pattern before, where disbelief turns into sudden acceptance and then into dependence. And that transition can be chaotic if it isn't guided, which is why I've said repeatedly that the biggest risk with AI is not malice, but misalignment combined with indifference. The idea that we just let systems grow more powerful without deeply understanding what objectives they are actually optimizing for. And at XAI, we talk about this constantly, not in abstract philosophy seminars, but in very practical engineering terms. What reward functions are we using? How does the model correct itself? How do we ensure it can say, I don't know, rather than hallucinate an answer? Because truth really is the bedrock of everything. And without it, intelligence becomes brittle and dangerous. And I think my own background influences this perspective more than people realize. Rockets don't forgive sloppy assumptions. Physics doesn't care about your feelings. And I want AI systems that operate with that same ruthless respect for reality. And that's part of why I believe a smaller, more focused team can sometimes outperform much larger institutions. Because clarity of mission matters, and our mission is not to dominate a market, but to understand the universe and help humanity navigate it. And when critics say that 2026 is too aggressive, I understand where they are coming from. But they often underestimate nonlinear change. They assume tomorrow will look like today plus a little more, when in reality these systems bootstrap themselves. Each generation helps design the next, and that feedback loop is incredibly powerful. And once you see that, once you really internalize it, the timeline stops looking crazy and starts looking almost inevitable. And then the real question becomes not when, but how. How do we roll this out responsibly? How do we prevent concentration of power? How do we ensure that AI becomes a tool that elevates human potential rather than replacing human purpose. And I don't pretend to have all the answers. Anyone who says they do is lying to themselves. But I do believe that avoiding the problem is the worst possible choice. And I've never been comfortable sitting on the sidelines while others decide the future, especially when the stakes are this high. And there's also a deeply personal element to this that I don't talk about often, which is that I think about the long-term survival of consciousness itself, not just human civilization over the next century, but the possibility of life extending beyond Earth, becoming multi-planetary, and intelligence is the lever that makes that possible. Biological intelligence got us this far, but to go further, to truly explore and understand the cosmos, we're going to need something more, something that can think at scales and speeds we can't. And if we do this right, AI becomes an extension of humanity, a partner rather than a competitor. And that's the future I'm aiming for, even if the path there is uncomfortable and full of controversy. And I know that saying these things invites criticism. It always has. But progress has never been driven by consensus. It's been driven by people willing to accept the risk of being wrong in order to move forward. And when I look back years from now, whether the date was exactly 2026 or a bit later, won't matter nearly as much as whether we had the courage to take responsibility for what we were building, and that, more than anything, is why I keep pushing, why I keep talking about AGI openly, because pretending it isn't coming doesn't stop it from arriving. It just ensures we're unprepared when it does.